Hello everyone, this is Amelia from Mima Makes, and today I'm going to be talking about how to make, let me just go backwards a little bit, one of these blankets made from sampler squares. When we're making one of a blanket like this, I get asked a lot, what pattern did I use? And the answer is, I used 49 different patterns for this blanket. There is no one pattern for this blanket. You can find sampler blanket patterns out there. So if you just want one pattern and you know all the squares are going to be the same size, you can find patterns out there like it. I will try and do a bit of Googling and see if I can find some that I can link in the description. So if you just want one pattern, then go ahead. But what I'm going to talk about today is how to use all different patterns in the same blankets, how to make them the same size, joining methods, etc. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we need to think about is where we're going to get those patterns. So if you're not going to be using one single pattern, you could maybe get a book like this one. So this is 200 Crochet Blocks by Eaton, and there are lots of patterns in here for all different kinds of crochet squares. There are loads of books out there. I don't recommend this one particularly. I think it's okay for what it is. There are lots of other ones out there. The thing that I found with this book is the squares aren't the same size. So there's patterns for lots of squares, but they're not all the same size. So yeah, so I used a few of these in my blanket, but mostly I used free patterns on Ravelry for the blanket. And I have linked them all in the project page for this blanket on Ravelry. So if you don't know what Ravelry is, it's a free platform with hundreds of thousands of free crochet, knitting and patterns. There are paid patterns on there too. Got a bit of hair sticking out. So there are paid patterns on there too, but you can filter the searches for free. You can look at other people's projects. You can look at the yarn that you're using for project inspiration. So yeah, I highly recommend a Ravelry account if you don't already have Ravelry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my laptop, show you my screen, and I'm going to show you how I searched for free square patterns on Ravelry. So this is currently my Ravelry projects page, and I just wanted to show you before we get going with how to search for patterns is if we scroll down in my projects, we're actually looking for this project over here, which is the Flowers and Lace Sampler Blanket. I've had quite a few comments on Instagram that people haven't been able to find it on my projects page. So it is here, and if we click on this here, you can see here are the many links to the patterns that I used for this blanket. You can see here all of the yarn details and some notes along the way that I made. Right, so now let's get to how to search for patterns on Ravelry. So let's go to Ravelry homepage. So Ravelry is a bit confusing when you first try and use it, but it's actually a really useful, comprehensive tool, and I highly recommend it to any knitters or crocheters. So we're going to search for patterns. So if you look up here in the top left screen, I'm clicking patterns. And then you can see that I've got it selected on knitting at the minute, but we're going to change that to crochet. And then rather than searching in this bar, we're actually going to click Advanced Search just here. So on the Advanced Search page, you've actually got, over on this left-hand side, you've got a lot of filters that you can put on. And this is where we're going to find our blocks. So the first thing I'm going to tick is availability. We're going to go for free. And I think have I accidentally clicked a thing? Yeah. Whoopsie, I've accidentally clicked light fingering. Anyway, so yeah, so now if I click free crochet patterns, we've got 144,000. So yeah, this is a pretty amazing resource to have available too. So then up here under category, we're going down to components. And then in components, there's two blocks here that we could use. There's Afghan block, which I'll tick. And there's also floral block, and I used to search for both of these simultaneously. So here we are. So these are all of the free patterns for crochet squares. So up here we've got a sort by, and it's gone for best match, but we've not actually searched for anything. So what I usually go for is I go for most popular, most projects, most favorited and most queued, because they're the ones that are popular, and often the popular patterns are popular for a reason, because they're easy, they're interesting. So yeah, so let's go for like most projects. Let's see what the most popular Afghan block is on Ravelry. So most projects, and unsurprisingly it's some hexagons and then a normal granny square, and there's a couple of Attic 24 patterns here, so that makes sense. So you can see here there's quite a lot of squares. Let's see if I can scroll down. I'm pretty sure I use this More V's Please in my blanket. I definitely use this one. This is one of the ones that was highly recommended, so I've used this one, I use this one, I use this one, and I use this one. So there's quite a lot on just this first page that I actually used, and there's some super interesting one. I made that before on a previous sample blanket I made for my nan. So yeah, there's a lot on here, and that is basically how you search for patterns in Ravelry. If this has been really helpful for you, then let me know, because what I can do is I can do some quick tutorials, put them up on YouTube, of how to use Ravelry, how to search for yarns and projects and designers and stashes and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, if you think that would be helpful for you, let me know in the comments, and that is something I will do moving forwards. Okay, so I almost forgot about how to actually get these patterns, because we can see them on the screen, but how do we get to them? So let's pick, I know I use this one and I thought it was a good pattern. So we'll have a look at Kata over here by Penny Davidson. So once you open up the projects page, you can see a few pictures down the left hand side of projects that people have made with it. There's also on the right hand side, we can save it to our favourites, we can add it to our queue, we can add it to our pattern library, we can make a project from it. So there's lots of things you can do. And then down here you can actually look at ones other people have made. So there's 568 projects here that people have made with this square. So let's just click on that one quickly. So you can see that a lot of people have used it. And then to actually access the pattern, there's usually a link about here for it. It's often a free PDF download, but sometimes it's a link to a blog post as well. So yeah, that is how you find patterns on Ravelry. So now we've found some square patterns, we need to think about the yarn we're using. So the yarn that I use for this blanket is double knit yarn. It's mostly acrylic yarn, either Stylecraft Special DK and Hayfield Bonus DK, with one, if I can find it, this green colour here, that is sea green in James C. Brett double knit with Merino. So yeah, so once you've got the yarn, so in terms of yarn, so my squares are all 20 centimetres across. I used a 4mm hook, and there's 33 stitches, not including the corners of these squares. I'll explain why a bit later, but I wish I'd done 32. If you're going to use my join method that I will talk about a bit later, then do a multiple of 3 plus 2 for the outside round of your squares. So the squares that I used were all different sizes. So what I actually did was, some of them I followed the pattern and then just stopped once my square was the right size. Some of them, so I didn't continue on, so I made them smaller than the pattern. And then some were smaller than the square size I wanted, so I added extra rounds to make them the same size. And I had one, I can't remember which one, but I had one square, and I would lay my work in progress square on top to see how close it was in size. And some of these did end up, like this one was the smallest. So that one ended up, because of the way it is, it's called the quatrefoil square, I think. So the way that it is it pulls in slightly on the sides. I don't think you can see it very well. So that one was slightly smaller, you can actually see that, than the other squares, but once they're joined you can't really tell, so they don't need to be exactly the same size. I don't feel like I explained that very well, so I'm just going to have a quick go at explaining again.
So what I would do is I'd have one square and I'd lay another square on top, and if it was slightly smaller I would judge it by eye whether I needed to add like a round of single crochet, half double crochet or double crochet. And there was a lot of trial and error, so often I would do maybe 2 rows and the square would end up too big, so I'd rip a row back, or maybe I'd do a row of single crochet and it would have 33 stitches, but it was too small, so I ended up ripping it out and doing a row of half double crochet. So I think the way that I did this project isn't very beginner friendly, so I feel like you need to know crochet quite well to do the editing to the squares that I did. But like I said, you could find patterns out there that are already the right size for you. So yeah, we'll go back to the main video now. I just wanted to insert this little explanation.
The other thing about your squares as well when you're making them is you could make up your own squares. One of these this one, I just did a normal granny square and then edged it in a few rounds of double crochet. I use US terms. I know I'm British, but I use US terms. So yeah, I then edged it in double crochet. So the other thing about these squares are, on some of them, I didn't follow the pattern, I followed the idea. So let me just find one that I did this with. I know this one. So this square here, so that flower in the centre is actually the water lily square from this book, but I did a different edging. You can see I added some popcorn stitches that almost look a bit like leaves, and then I just did some double crochet edging. So on some of them I did, and this one as well, I took the flower from an existing pattern and then I made up these leaves with some front post double crochets as I went. So I can't release a pattern for this blanket or tutorials for this blanket because I use so many people's patterns. So some of the patterns did have video tutorials and photo tutorials as well. So yeah, and then this is the one that I get asked about so much. This is the Felicitas Afghan Square by Diana Krenz. So yeah, I'll link that down in the description because it's my favourite, and I know it's a lot of other people ask me about this square all the time. So yeah, I'll link that specific pattern down below, but the rest of the patterns go to my Ravelry project page and you'll find my big list of links there. So yeah, so once we've got our squares, we need to think about joining them. So you could just leave the ends long and sew them together like whip stitch or mattress stitch or something like that. But what I actually did is I did a join as you go in a separate contrast colour. So I used 12 colours for the squares, and I got about 4 squares per 100-gram ball of double knit. So I've got 49 total squares. And then I think I used for the join and the border, I think I used 6 or 6.5, maybe 7. I've got it written down. I'll put however much it is on the screen. But yeah, balls of Stylecraft Special double knit in warm grey. And this is a version, let me just hold it to the screen. This is a version of a join as you go technique. And I actually have a tutorial on it that I'll link on the screen now and down in the description and at the end of this video so that you can get to it. So yeah, so it's a join as you go. You don't have to use this join as you go. You could edge them in just like a round of single crochet and then sew them. You could use whatever joining technique you want. And then we need to think about borders. So let me just get this book. So this book, which is Crochet Borders by Edie Eckman, who I think is quite a well-known crochet designer in the UK. I'm not sure. I've had this book of like 10 years, so yeah. And it's got loads of borders in. So having a book like this with lots of crochet borders is really, really handy when you make blankets because you can just add any border on. I tried out a couple of these on my blanket. I didn't like it. I tried a different kind of border. Honestly, the border took me about a week and a half. I'm not even like joking. I had to order more yarn, and that's why I'm not sure about the amounts. I can't remember how much extra yarn I bought. So yeah, so in the end, I actually designed it myself. So they are like scallops with cluster stitches here. Let me just see if I can show it out. That shows it a bit better. So yeah, but the problem with them, and you can see here, is they're curling. So I can do a tutorial on this edging if you want. Let me know in the comments if you want that. The problem with it is I'm not happy with it as a pattern because it doesn't lie flat and it needs blocking, and I hate blocking acrylic. Especially like this blanket is nearly 6 feet across, square. Like, how do I block this? I just don't know. I'm not going to block it. But yeah, so you can see here, these, because they're curling, I don't know whether I should do a tutorial or not. I think if I do a tutorial, I might change the actual pattern and maybe do one less stitch so that they're more likely to lay flat. So yeah, if you want this, just let me know. I hope that this answers all of your questions about this blanket. If it doesn't, then drop me a comment below and I will try and answer your questions. I will put the yarn details and the pattern details in the description and the link to the joining technique. And if I do end up doing a tutorial for the border, I will leave a link there if you're watching this in the future. So yeah, happy hooking!